This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.
Hey, Kiani.
Yeah.
Have you ever found in your journey of business that you've sort of really struggled to bring your personal life and your business life together?
Yeah, constantly. I feel like that's probably the biggest challenge that I've faced, not only as a business owner, but as a female, as a parent, as a human, as a partner. They always tend to clash.
I reckon we have some conversations, bring in some guests and talk about humanising business, because if we do that, then maybe we can be the same person 24/7.
Yeah, let's shed some light on this topic that can be quite convoluted and make it somewhat more simple.
I reckon that sounds cool, because after all, business is life and life is business. Team, it's a very, very warm welcome back to Beauty and the Palm. We have got ourselves our first live episode today. We are side by side. Kiani, how are you in the flesh?
I'm amazing. It's so good. You're real.
I know.
Touch you.
Exactly. Oh, not there though.
Andy.
Gang, it's a warm welcome to you all, and we are in the abode of someone that we have a tremendous amount of respect for, and someone that is actually really, really integral to this very, very show. Maritza Barone is a media expert. She's been in the game for a heck of a long time, been in front of the camera, been behind the camera, and she is now the leader in a network called Guide Your Light. And she is a tremendous advocate for finding the power in people's voices and bringing them to the world via the podcast format. Maritza, very, very warm welcome to you. And thank you so much for having us in your home.
No, isn't it just lovely that two beautiful faces are right here? We are sitting in very close proximity to each other, huddled around our blue Yeti mic, but this is good because it's going to be an intimate conversation.
That's right. It feels comfortable. I like it.
Exactly. I think they call it a fireside chat. Is that what the kids call it these days?
I have no idea.
I reckon it is. But it's no, definitely not. I mean, we have all had showers beforehand, so we're at least we can be in each other's presence in close proximity. Now, Maritza, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. And from my point of view, I've been really sort of honoured, for want of a better word, to have various professional exchanges, and then over the course of a trip up to Queensland, we've had a chance to get to know each other a bit more personally as well. I'm fascinated by your background and your story that's brought you to this point right here, where you've started the Guide Your Light network. You've got an incredible podcast of your own right that's been going for some time now, called Things You Can't Unhear. Tell me the story and tell the gang about the story of the podcast first and foremost, because that's an awesome little story. So tell us why your podcast is called Things You Can't Unhear.
Absolutely. I love the name still. It's 4 years on, and I still know that name was the right name for my show. I've worked in media, like you said, for a long time, up to 15 years, if not more. And I worked for a long time on productions that really didn't align to my beliefs and values. So it came to a point in my career where I really had to look at what I was working on, who I was working with, and who I was on a deeper level. Because as a presenter and a producer, I was handed scripts and briefs that were just words on a page, and I was selling other people's thoughts and brands and businesses and ideas. And I had so much inside of me that I wanted to share, and I wasn't doing it. And I had to look at why I even wanted to be in this industry in the first place. So there was a lot of deep digging. There was a lot of treats, courses, books, podcasts, listening to, and lots of, self-discovery to get to, exactly what the purpose was that I wanted to go on. But I remember one day I was working on set, and there were sprinkles of amazing moments while I was a presenter and producer where I would have these incredible opportunities to speak to, these change makers in their field. And on this one particular day, I was interviewing Therese Kerr, which is Miranda Kerr's mum, for those who don't know. And she was talking about how she healed herself from cancer. And it was this incredible self-healing journey that she was talking about that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. It was the first time I heard that thoughts are creative. It was the first time I heard that we have more control, creative control over what happens in our lives. It was the first time I heard of, what we consume and how we think and believe, and what we put on our skin and what we eat actually really truly affects what goes on in our bodies and so it was just this amazing moment of learning. And I remember walking away from that conversation going, I can't unhear that. That was absolutely life-changing, that information. And when I told the two guys that I was working with on the day, I was like, guys, I cannot unhear that. That was unbelievable. And they were just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to go have a can of Coke and a pie and just get on with our day. So for them, it wasn't transformative, but for me, it really was. And a few years after, when I decided that I wanted to create my own podcast, I knew that Things You Can't Unhear was perfect because I wanted others to feel that moment that I had felt when I was listening to Therese Kerr tell her story. So what I do through my podcast is try to get people to have those aha moments where they're like, whoa, I need to create positive change in my life because I have heard that. That has triggered something in me that makes me want to create positive change.
Why did you use the podcast, the medium of podcasting, to get this message out there? Because you, like we've said, you've been in front of the camera, you've been behind the camera, you've been in casting, you've done the whole box and dice, right?
Yeah.
And so you would have a tremendously strong handle on how consumers are receiving information now. So, two-part question. Why did you go down the podcast route, and what was it that made you think, right, I need to go down this path as opposed to the videography kind of path?
It's a really good question, Andy. For years, to be honest, I used to think in TV shows. So if an idea popped up, I'd be like, I'm going to create a TV show out of that. And I have deck after deck after deck. I can't tell you. In my computer files, there are so many TV show decks of creative ideas that I've come up with. The difference between a podcast and a television show is budget. Massive amount of budget difference.
Right.
So I was working in radio at this particular stage, and this was maybe 5 years ago. And I was walking around Southern Cross Stereo in Melbourne. So one of the top radio stations, Triple M, Fox FM, were in those hallways. And everyone was talking about podcasting. It was just, the buzz was everywhere. Listener was downstairs, and it was called Podcast One then, and it was everywhere. Everyone was talking about podcasting, and I was like, I should just create a podcast because that would be much easier. It would be much cheaper. I could actually do it remotely, and I would have way more control over it. And I don't need a $60,000 to $100,000 budget to hire camera crew, equipment, soundies, and all the other stuff that it requires studios to create the show. And that's what I did. And that's why I love podcasting so much, because it's so accessible to voices out there who have important messages to share.
That's interesting, that one. I was expecting you to go down some odd altruistic sort of how consumers get, have their attention lengthened and things like that. But it's awesome. I'm so relieved. This is great for the listeners, right? Because that's such one of the most practical answers you could have possibly given. Because that's one of the things that puts a lot of businesses off doing anything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Is the expenditure, is the outlay worth punting in the hope that it's going to bring you some sort of reward, particularly in a branding point of view, right? Yeah. Because with branding, it's always speculative. You can't you can't just bank on the fact that, right, I'm going to spend this amount of money and it's going to give me $2 of return. Robert's your father's brother. It's just not going to happen, right? And that's the thing with branding. And that's where I love the fact that you've gone, right, I've got a message to say, and I've got a brand idea around it, but I've got to be smart about my choices around the expenditure, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of time. You talk about the remote thing. I mean, Kiani and I, we had this exact conversation.
We did, absolutely.
Kiani hit us up and asked if should we do a show? And I went, yeah, sweet, let's do one. What do you want to do or talk about? She goes, I don't know. So that was a great start. But then we were good at, I think.
I really do.
Yeah.
I was part of that conversation, I remember.
Yeah. But then because your original thought was us doing a live show. Yeah. And then we both realized that from a convenience point of view.
Yeah, and a commitment perspective.
two kids each, businesses coming out.
States, different time
zones, different business commitments, different schedules, all the rest of it. And that's where we found that podcasting was just the most accessible way.
Thank you. Yeah, because for us, it was either going to be an 8 p.m. show that we might be able to get to depending on what the kids decide to do, or take the time that we need when we need it, when we can. And we can do it online. We can look what we're doing right now, face to face.
It's perfect. And when the kids do come in and interrupt, guess what? Edit that bit out.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
How good is it? Yeah.
Sometimes. Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it can't be helped. One thing I wanted to ask though, Maritza, because of your absolute well of experience, how do you feel consumers are receiving attention these days? Because I think it's common. Is it common? Yeah, I think it's common to say that our attention span has shortened dramatically, which is why we all watch 60-second reels and 30-second TikToks. Exactly. But with podcasts, it still has a real length to its format, right? In many respects. So how do you feel consumers receive attention in the ears as opposed to any other format?
I love that question. And it is one of the true reasons that I love podcasting. And this is what I talk about with businesses and companies and brands a lot too, because people get to take you in their lives with them. So you don't need to be sitting in front of your phone. You don't need to be sitting in front of your laptop or your PC. You can actually plug in, go for a walk, do the dishes, do the vacuuming, go for a drive to work, school, pick up, whatever you need to do. You can still be consuming that content. So it can be 30, 40 minutes where you, as brands, businesses, companies, individuals, you can connect with your ideal community member or client or whoever you're speaking to, while they're doing something that they actually love doing.
So you're not taking away their time.
Correct.
It's almost adding to and enhancing the time that they do have.
And I was looking at the stats recently, 94% of people consume podcasts while they're doing something else.
Yeah.
So it's not as if they just sit there. They can fill their time while doing something constructive as well. So you know what we're all like. We always feel like we need to be doing something at the moment. I think it's a beautiful way to connect with people on a level. And there's really no other medium where you can do that at the moment, where you two get to tell your story to your community for 40 minutes on average every week. And they sit there and listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, and authentically as well.
Authentically, exactly. They're not going to do that with a YouTube channel because they don't have the time to sit in front of their computer or on their phone, or there's all these distractions coming in. So that's why I think podcasting is really great. And what I'm doing a lot at the moment with brands and companies is that I'm seeing companies start to use it on a training level. So they're using their training content through podcasting format so that their teams can then consume it while driving home from work or driving to work. So they get everyone to tune in at 8 o'clock on a Monday while they're driving to work, and everyone's already heard the training content before they get to that boardroom meeting, and it's open for discussion. It's fresh in their minds.
Yeah, with Century 21, I've done a version of that, but I think the bit that's been missing for me, I've already learned something by sitting here, which is amazing, so thank you, is having that scheduled regularity, when that podcast goes out to the masses from a training and education point of view. But you're absolutely spot on. I knew that our viewership, and this is where online courses are just, I can't crack it, right? Because you can't keep their attention, and getting them to commit to actually following through on one of these training platforms, one of these LMS, learning management systems, it's nigh impossible, man, because unless you stood over them doing it, which is not going to happen, then
kind of not allowed.
Oh, look, man. And because the LMS that we have, we track how long they actually watch these videos, and these guys say that they do it. But then we actually go and see how much time they spend on each video, and they're just clicking through second by second so that they can get the little
ticket. I've done that before.
Shit, yeah. We've all done it.
It's interesting, though, to watch, and I'll use BNI as the example, because pre-COVID, all of our trainings were in person, and everyone had to take 2 or 3 hours out of their day, or even a whole day in some training situations, to sit down and learn face-to-face. COVID changed everything. We had to move to an online platform. They've created this amazing university, which is fantastic. And the request and the demand is that as a new member, you must do X course within 3 months of your membership. It is harder to get people to do the online course, even though it is accessible. It is available to them at any time. Yes, it is on their computer, but it's harder to get them to commit to doing that than it was to drag them out of their environment for half a day and do it face to face.
Yes, because
Dom's that.
Isn't it backwards?
Yeah.
I'm like, surely it's easier this way. When we first moved over, I was like, yes, brilliant. This is fantastic. Everyone's going to do it within the first week of being a member. Nah, we're literally writing them to get them to do the first 3 months.
they think they need to allocate that time and it seems too hard. So I feel like, this gives them an opportunity to go, all right, I still want to do my morning walk, but I'll listen, or I'll just do it on the way to work.
And there's something in that too around our unconscious brain. When we're listening to things through our ears, we may not be, as you said, we might be doing the dishes or making dinner or something. So we're doing two things at once. So maybe we're not giving it 100% focus, but our unconscious brain is still picking up everything that is coming through our ears. So whether we get it or not, it's there. Like it's being embedded on a deeper level. So even though there is something to be said around, focus is everything and sitting down and giving it your full attention, you are still taking what you need at that point in time. And that's better than nothing.
Oh, big time. I always listen to podcasts when I'm doing something that is habitual. Right? When I know when my body knows it more than my mind. Joe Dispenza, here we go.
Well done.
When my body knows it more than my mind, I know that my mind can just go do something else. And what I always find myself doing is something will prick my ears up and then I'll go, oh, shit, what was that? And my unconscious mind is going, that's important. And I go back and then purposefully listen, pay attention and whatnot. But it's interesting. You're absolutely spot on, Key. The unconscious mind does understand when something's important.
And it will take it on even if you don't think you're paying attention.
And how many times have you been listening to a podcast and you have those incredible, like you just aha moments, or those information nuggets that I need to remember that. My phone notes are full of those situations where I need to write that down. And I'm sure in a learning perspective, that would be the same scenario. There could also be a bit of a checklist afterwards. I think with online courses, there's one question. What did you hear?
Good old question.
Yeah, so there could be still a way to tie that in that is in a fresh way, because I think we need to look at creating content for teams, for employees, for staff, whoever it is, your community, if you're an individual, in a fresh and engaging way. This is 2023 and, I nearly said two.
It's okay.
And we need to keep things fresh for people and keep them engaged for longer periods.
That's the other thing I really, really feel with podcasts as well is it is purposeful to go onto the podcast platform and we are genuinely there to learn.
Yeah.
Listening to music can be a distraction and it can be calming and it can be energetic. It can be all of those amazing things, but we're not necessarily going to listen to music to learn anything. Whereas podcasts are very specific. They are educational, they're informative, they are interesting depending on the topic or the whatever it is that you're listening to. But that education element, you're already mentally there to learn.
Yeah.
You're already mentally in that space to absorb information and take it in. So I feel like you're already 50% over the hurdle of receptive brain capacity and you're taking it in like a sponge.
What I tell a lot of my clients too is to educate through storytelling. So I feel like on online courses or, those traditional way of learning techniques is that storytelling often gets forgotten. And us as human beings retain information when there's an emotion connected to it. So if you're sharing a story first with the people who you're trying to educate and teach, then you share a fact or statistic on the back of that story, and then you give them a call to action. That's the way that they're going to engage with the content the most. And it's a proven method that I've seen used over and over again. I've tested it myself, and it's, I know that that's how I learn is if someone tells me a story, I've connected with it. When I walk out of that room, I'm going to remember that story because my emotions were part of it. I felt what was happening and I resonated and related with that story in some way. Even if it's around business or, it's what you guys are doing. You're sharing, you're bringing in your personal stories to this podcast and people remember it on a different level to if you were just shedding out business information.
And that's where, before this podcast, Kiani and I were having a good conversation around how it brings out the real ones in us, right? So what were you saying about that the other night?
I think for me, it was the bigger picture of, we live in, and we've spoken about this on the podcast before, we live in a society where Instagram is tailored to selling a life that may not be real. Creating filters and creating content that is beautiful and lovely, but it's a lot of the times we kind of shy over the reality of it. And the thing that I've found so beautifully with the podcast, especially when you've got someone like Andy sitting next to you who asks really great and very confronting questions, you don't get to hide. It is such an instinctive thing that the voice comes out before you've even had a chance to manipulate it in a way that you think people need to hear, as opposed to just letting it flow and letting it come out. And that's the beautiful thing that we've experienced. There's a practical side to it as well, which is what you've just spoken about there. And being a part of the Guide Your Light platform, because it was a really daunting thing for us to start. Jumping on and doing the live for us was like, yeah, great, we can talk shit, let's just do that.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, there needs to be a purpose, there needs to be direction. As Maritza's beautiful guiding was, there needs to be a story, we need to interact, there needs to be points. Like there has to be some form of process for each episode and then for the whole entire thing. So from a social media, I'm going to call it a fake perception, then we've got our podcast space, which I feel is a little bit more raw and authentic. How do you sit and we understand your story and that's how you've been able to share other people's voices. But this Guide Your Light platform, I feel is a real community in itself that is giving people permission to remove the manipulation and take things to a deeper level, as you said. Was that part of the plan, or is that just naturally come?
Well, it's evolved. And, with who I am and what Guide Your Light, what the Guide Your Light language, the way it's being crafted, I'm attracting the most incredible humans to the network. I don't want to create true crime podcasts. Like, they're not my thing. I'm here to create podcasts that are purpose-led, are impactful, and are changing lives. And that can be around any topic, as long as your purpose is around creating positive change in others in some way and sharing your stories to do that. I love elevating voices. I get so excited when I see my clients who a lot of the time have been too afraid to speak. I know you two aren't. You're right out there and you're amazing speakers. Having
said that, though, we discovered a bit of an Achilles heel with Kay Mills on one of our conversations recently. And we all have that imposter syndrome at some stage, right? We all have that thing of,
I'm not ready.
Yeah, it's not ready yet.
Not perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now with that, right? And this is where I think a lot of small business owners, sole traders, a lot of those people that have few people to bounce stuff off, get opinions from, they haven't gone out and got a coach, all that sort of stuff. And they feel that everything has to be polished all the time.
Yeah.
When it comes to podcasting, what do you feel are the biggest mistakes when it comes to having, that going across the line and going to something that's just too refined and too polished? Is there such a thing?
Look, most podcasts only last 7 episodes because people don't plan and structure. And I've heard podcasts out there. I've known people who have launched them, and I've tuned in because I've been really excited about, I know that person. I'd love to hear their podcast. And I listen to it and I'm like, I don't think there's been any thought put in this at all, unfortunately. Like, as a listener, I think we always need to respect your listener because you don't want to be hearing jimble jamble. You want to be actually using your time while you're listening to that podcast and using it purposefully. So I think it's important that there is that structure element, and that's why it's called Guide Your Light, because I have created a structure where people can follow and it fits all the boxes where you know exactly what you need to tick and you are following some type of process in order to get this podcast running smoothly. And, there's templates and there's spreadsheets and there's checkboxes. So there's, a tried and tested method through all of the people that I've worked with and my podcast to make sure that you're following some type of system. But like Keanu said before, there's something in just letting things flow. So for everyone I interview on my podcast, for example, I'll have like a basic question outline. I never share it with them unless they beg me for it, because I feel like if they're asking for the question, they're going to be preparing the answers too much, and then that authenticity and rawness isn't going to flow like we were just talking about earlier.
So people get asked that are extremely time poor. Getting it handed to you on a silver platter was like the most amazing thing in the world. We kind of sat down the first time, went, actually, you know what? For me, it was recording our intro.
Yeah.
Recording the intro, we went, we actually have to think about this and plan it. We actually wrote it out.
We did. I think
and we were not planning. Yeah, we were not planning any of that. We were like, just wing it. We'll be fine.
Yep.
We can talk. We're good. But the structure is what's held us accountable.
Big time.
And starting off with that intro and being so purposeful with that intro we wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for you.
Well, 100%, because you've got to respect your listeners. Again, I'm tying it back to that. They don't want to hear a 9-minute introduction that goes at the start of every episode. They want to hear something quick, concise. They want to know why they're listening, who they're listening to, and what they're going to get out of it, and be entertained at the same time, which you're both very good at.
Sometimes.
Yes, sometimes. And it's really interesting because you mentioned appreciating and respecting your listener quite a lot. And this is where, for me, having that degree of professionalism around it instead of just swinging the bat and hoping for the best, I think that's where your brand can be affected in some respects more than the actual content itself, right? Because we mentioned a lot of it's subconscious listening and whatnot. So some of the stuff that actually gets said in the meat and veg of the podcast can be sort of grazed over, right? But if your structure's crap and things like sound, if your sound's rubbish and all that sort of stuff, how much more of an impact do you think that has on your brand holistically as opposed to the actual content itself?
How many times have you switched off a podcast because the sound was crap? Yeah, loads of time. Like, there needs to be an element of quality there to, again, respect your listeners.
Respect is a beautiful word.
Yeah, I love it.
That is the word, because we are we are asking people to tune in and listen to us.
Yeah.
We need to be respectful of the time.
It reminds me of a quote that I sort of lived by when I still live by Neil Donald Walsh. And, you know, as voices, like people in media, and we love being around a microphone and sharing our opinions and thoughts and what we have to share. But Neil Donald Walsh said, your life is not about you. Your life is about those who touch and how you touch them. How you reach and how you reach them. So, yes, it's exciting. Yes. I had that on my fridge for a long time so that my kids could understand that as well. Yes, it's exciting as someone who gets to share their thoughts and voice for the first time. But at the same time, the reason why you're doing it always needs to be because of the impact you're going to be having on that person who's putting those headphones into their ears and listening to you. That needs to be the impact.
It's not about you. I had this great video that I showed the team, and it's part of our communication strategy in our office. And it's a video about a woman who has a nail stuck in her head, and she's sitting down with her partner and she's saying, I've just got this really bad headache, and I've just got this stress in my brain, and I'm just really stressed out. And he's sitting there like, it's this big giant nail sitting in your head. And she's like, you just don't understand. I just need to listen to me. I'm just really like the pressure I had. It's so much. And the whole context of the video is it's not about the nail. It's about what's going on outside of that. And for some people, like, we are in the position where we are sharing our voices and we are asking people to take time out of their day to listen to our voices. It's not about us. It's not about what we're going through. While the information needs to be pointed and purposeful and impactful, it's not what we want to hear. It's what they want to hear.
Exactly.
I love that.
And there's a difference between branding and selling, right? That's really the critical.
Yeah.
You know, brand.
That's something with a podcast. Here it's out.
No, the beauty in the podcast's got absolutely F all to do with what both of us are doing to a degree in terms of the actual brand itself. One thing I wanted to ask you then, Maritza, was with that whole branding versus selling versus telling stories that are going to create impact on people. I want to get practical for a second if we can. there's a lot of small business owners that are going to be listening to this that we're like, yeah, well, my job's boring as batshit. Like, what stories could I possibly tell about cutting grass or, you know, bookkeeping or something along those lines, right? So what are your sort of top sort of tips, hints, whatever it may be, around those small business owners who don't feel that their job has got any stories in it?
There's stories in everything. Everyone has a story. It's the way that you tell it. It's the way that you engage. And you know what? Like, there may be industries where that's not interesting to us. I'm not sure that cutting grass may be of interest to me if I was to listen to that podcast.
No.
But there's definitely others out there who would find information around that type of business interesting because they're in that world. So this is where I always say to find your audience before you start as well. Who are you actually talking to? Who are you trying to attract? And where do they live? What do they like to do? What, get to know them before you start talking as well, because then you know how to craft your language and what the message needs to be, because you know exactly who you're talking to. So is that something that you've thought about with your podcast? Do you know who you're talking to? Do you know exactly who your avatar is?
Yeah, no, I was waiting for you to say the word avatar, which is rather poignant with Avatar 2 coming out.
Yeah,
But I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think one of the pitfalls that loads of people fall into, I know I've fallen into this, is when you're trying to please too many people.
Exactly. The people pleaser.
Oh, shit. Like, and you try and navigate your language and your message to try and appease the masses. What advice could you give then based on that? Say, for example, they've worked out they're able to, so let's go with the gardeners, right? We'll stick with the gardeners for now. So gardeners obviously want to talk to homeowners with gardens that can't be asked doing their own lawns, or they haven't got time or whatever, right? So once you've worked out your avatar, what do you feel would be the next steps that a gardener would take when it comes to navigating and constructing this whole narrative that they're going to be telling to their avatars?
It's like when you're setting up a business, right? You go niche, and then you go sub niche, and then you go sub niche, and that's what you need to do with a podcast as well. You need to go, education, then self-improvement, and then well-being. Like, you need to really narrow down who you're speaking to in a clear and defined way. And then it can start expanding once you've reached those people. And that's why I find it really critically important to do the work before you start talking. Because it's very tempting to just switch on the mic.
I think the big thing that stood out for me, especially on that point, was when Maritza asked us what category do we want to sit in on the podcast.
And neither of us had it.
And we had no idea. No. We were like, oh, is it business? Oh, is it self-development? Oh, is it learning? Oh, is it well-being? Like,
you're like, how many can we choose?
Yeah. We have 10, please.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that.
And even that little exercise in itself was so informative for us, because we had no idea.
Yeah.
So we weren't, and that specific is terrific.
Yeah.
We were not being specific enough.
You two were my last clients that I had before I launched my Guide Your Light sessions. So the learning that we had together, the three of us, during the build up to creating your podcast, then fed into me creating a course off the back of it. So it's literally 3 videos, a workbook, and 2 templates where you can have these realizations and structure and plan to do all of the things you need to do in a way that's going to set you up for an impactful and successful podcast. Because there were so many questions that were coming my way, and I thought, I can't keep repeating this to every single client that comes on board, and it's going to be too time consuming for them, too time consuming for me. So I literally recorded 3 40-minute videos, created this workbook, and it's accessible. So every time I onboard a client, they get access to this. They can jump straight back into the workbook at any time going, okay, what did I need to do? What do I need to look at when I'm crafting my intro? What about my show description? What keywords do I need to incorporate so that people find my show? What do I even call my show? How am I going to find that impactful name that people can also find easily when they're searching for something under that industry banner? Like, there's so many elements that you can think about that are just tied it up nicely into these sessions, which I call Guide Your Light sessions, that I make all of my new clients do, and it's just been a bit of a game changer, actually.
Because that really is then the impactful parts. Yeah. And the nuances that I was an absolute novice going into this. I think I listened to like 3 podcasts before we dove in and did this. And without the direction and the clarity around those nuances, I reckon I would have thrown this out.
Big time.
Because it was overwhelming. No. But it became, my mind was overwhelmed because I didn't know. But then by getting such clear instructions, I didn't feel like I had to know. You had it under control. So we were like, okay, let's just do as she asks.
And that's the thing, right? And
do as we're told.
That's right.
And FYI, gang, we'll make sure that the links to all of Maritza's stuff goes into the notes on the podcast. So because Maritza told us to do it, because that's the right way to end podcasting.
Yeah. And so, to help advertise our guests.
Yes. And so we'll make sure that all the links to whatever you need are on there. And please, for the love of God, make sure that you follow the Guide Your Light Network and Maritza, because it's really well worth following anyway, just for your own benefits. With respect to all that, though, what do you think and what do you feel? We've already mentioned about Avatar and whatnot, but if you could give like your top 3 super duper practical tips, what would they be?
Set your intention.
Yep.
Always.
Yep.
Know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one, it's not about you.
Yeah.
I love that. It's a beautiful way to wrap up everything that we've just covered off onto, because it is bigger. This is where Maritza's power of voice premise and everything that she does in that is around helping others who may not have the voice. So if you are in a position where you're thinking about starting a podcast, and I know that I was in a position where I went, I'm not special. Why the hell would anyone want to listen to me? What do I have that no one else has? My encouragement in that element would be that if you have something to share that is bigger than you and you think that it could help someone else along the way, do it. Don't get caught up in the perceived selfishness of doing it. Share it, because if you're going to impact even one person on the face of this planet, it's going to be worth it.
Thank you for bringing up the power of voice, because I've said to you many times, I never wanted to be known as the podcast woman. I wanted to be known as the woman who helps people to find and share their voice. And podcasting happens to be the vehicle that I'm helping people to use it in. But I also run sessions with people who who have the opportunity to stand on stage, perhaps in a corporate setting, have been invited as part of the leadership team to stand on stage and have never done it before, and need the assistance to find that power behind their voice and to engage people with conviction, clarity, and communicate with power. So that's another thing that I do run off the back of this business and work with people one-on-one. And I had the most beautiful woman came here to my house recently. We spent 3 hours together, and she went after that session and did this incredible presentation to the whole company, Australia-wide, for this ASX-listed company that she works for. And the feedback that I got just gave me tingles. She said, I've tried this many times before, and I never stood in my power like I did on that day. And, hopefully I empowered her to just understand that her voice is important. She has something that is worth listening to as well, because we can sometimes just hide in the shadows and think that other people can do it better than us, but you will never know until you try. And whether you're an individual, you're a brand, you're a business, you're a company, you're a corporation, whatever you're standing for, we all have a voice, and it's all worthy of being heard and shared.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter how big or small, right? So it doesn't matter if you've got an idea that can change the world, or if all you are doing is helping people to live a little bit more in some small way. You're making their lives easier by a service or a product or whatever it is that you are doing. That's when you've got something to say, and that's when you've got a story to tell. And it doesn't matter how trivial you feel it is to someone else, it's brand new.
Biggest comment that I learned in 2022 that really helped me was perfection kills dreams. So if you're listening to this, and to both of you too, you talked about it before, we don't need to be perfect in order to start sharing. So keep that in my head.
We're almost spoiled with the platforms that we have literally at our fingertips to be able to share these things through. I think a piece of advice would be, don't get caught up in the glitz and the unreal kind of world that, you know, Instagram and things like that can be. If you have a message, take it seriously. Take yourself seriously. And that was, you know, a big thing from last year, wasn't it, Andy?
Yep. In order to have people take you seriously, you first got to take yourself seriously. And that's massive for me. You know, we've got Kiani heading over to Paris a little bit later this year. And that's a huge milestone for her in terms of how she's taking herself seriously. And gang, like I said, man, if you're doing something that's helping someone in some way, shape or form, it doesn't have to be life-changing. It doesn't have to be revolutionary, but it's helping someone and it's advancing their lives in some small way. And that's when you've got a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we can tick off the little practical elements of cost.
Yep.
You know, low budget, which is brilliant. Time, it's put into this beautiful little package that we can deliver. And then convenience. You can literally record these anywhere, anytime. A thought pops into your head, record it. We've actually done a couple of little voice memos where I'm out for a walk or something like that, and I'll just send a little voice memo in that we can use.
Yep.
It is, from my perspective, from someone who's an absolute novice and quite, you know, overwhelmed by all of it to begin with, it has been the most genuine display of authenticity that I think I've ever been able to articulate, and getting to spend it with the incredible humans that I get beautiful Andy every week and amazing guests come on. So we're very spoiled.
You've done a good job at batch recording as well. So for the time poor people out there who say, I don't have an hour every week to contribute to this, you guys did an amazing job of going, okay, we're going to do 6 in one day or 3 days, whatever it was. You allocated that specific time to it, and then you didn't have to think about it again for 6 weeks, for example. So podcasts can be time consuming if you don't have the setup and structure in place beforehand.
And getting the help, right? Sometimes, and this is where I can hear a lot of people wincing and they're putting their purse strings tightening when we talk about getting the right support in. And this is where the whole speculation thing comes in, gang. If you're gonna do it properly. But it doesn't have to cost the earth. No. It really, really doesn't. But telling you now, it's going to take you a lot more time, and it's going to end up costing you a lot more money long term if you just go windmilling in without the structure and the setup and the support that Maritza is absolutely incredible in giving.
Delegation, right? I had big time.
And as Kiani just said, it just makes it easy for you to focus on the stuff that you want to talk about, as opposed to pissing around with mic settings and all this sort of jazz, right?
Played love hearts and figure eights.
God.
I had a testimonial from one of my clients recently, and she said, thank you for helping me put together this show. She said, I knew I wanted to create a show, but I didn't have the need nor the want to do any of the production side of it myself.
Yeah,
100%.
Perfect.
Yeah,
absolutely perfect.
100%.
I'm overwhelmed by this, and I really hope that people who are listening can see. I mean, we've had so much fun doing it as well. And this has been the funnest little adventure and ride I've ever been on.
Well, you didn't choose the dullest host, did you?
He's all right.
He's okay.
I don't learn something new every day. I don't know if anyone picked up earlier in the show. Andy, I giggled at it, and I didn't want to interrupt. What is it? Robert's your father?
Robert's your father's brother.
Yeah. In normal people world, we say Bob's your uncle.
You can take the palm out of England, right? You can take the palm out of England.
In normal people's world.
Normal we say Bob's your uncle.
Is that an English saying?
Your father's brother.
It's such an English saying. Yeah. It's a very Cockney.
Probably says it. I have to think about it. I'm like, Robert is your father's brother. Because Bob's the uncle. I get it.
Thanks for the translation. Gang, look, I'm sure that even though we have the great fortune of being a part of the Guide Your Light Network and having the opportunity to interact with such an incredible talent in this world, I've learned plenty from this. I know that Kiani has. She's got that smile across her face, which is always a good sign. Maritza, I can't thank you enough for one, sharing the absolute depth of knowledge that you have and the awareness that you have around the importance of telling stories and shining it and really displaying your light through that telling of stories. Having us in your home and being up here in the gorgeous Sunshine Coast. And I hope and I would be feel really privileged if we could have you on again sometime, because I'm sure there'll be a whole bunch of people that will want to hear you again on our show. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And you know what? My aim for this year going forward is to actually bring all these voices in the network together as a community where we can learn and grow from each other and network in a way where we can speak on each other's shows like this and get to know us. And, you know, we recently had a Christmas party. Andy, you came along. You were sitting next to Mel from Make Up Your Mindset. Mel runs charity events. She needed an auctioneer. Like, these are opportunities that the network can provide to our like-minded community.
That's another really good point too, is for us, I think one of the other daunting part was around finding guests. So having this community of other people who understand podcasts, have their own podcasts, we can interconnect with each other.
Exactly.
You've got this little array of people that are willing to share their voice.
And you know that they can speak so well.
That's right. There's no nurse there. Everything's good. So having that extra support there from the practical side is great, but you've also got a little community that you're walking into that you can leverage and access and use as you wish. Again, it is an exchange of energy. So if you are wanting someone to come on your show, then you've got to be willing to go on theirs as well. So, you know, it's that givers gang mentality.
Well, I think that's I think that's when we have you come back on board. I think that's another episode right there is the importance of guests and the importance of being strategic in the guests that you bring on and making sure that there is an alignment and an understanding as to the purpose of the podcast and why that person's been asked to come on board as well. So that is our excuse to get you back on board, Maritza. Right.
Fantastic.
There. Well, team, on behalf of Kiani, the incredible Maritza and myself, we thank you so much for joining us once again. As always, gang, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, and we'll speak to you again real soon.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are very grateful for your time, and we really hope that we've provided some value.
Follow us on Instagram if you've liked what you've heard, and if you have anything that you want us to talk about, things that might have been bugging you but you've not quite had the bottle to really bring it out into the open, send us a DM and we'll happily bring it to the table.